This presentation is on white privilege, and it's specifically targeted to teachers in public school settings, and predominantly teachers who work in suburban areas. So I kind of want to give some background as why I picked this as the topic. Instead of focusing on just a particular group or religion, something like that, I wanted to pick something that is very relevant for a lot of teachers out working today. So I'm going to start with what the average teacher is. The average teacher, according to the latest statistics, predominantly female, and this has been the case for a long time, predominantly white, and 42 years old. Speaking of ethnicity, 80% roughly of all teachers in the United States themselves are white. However, this is the opposite of what the students in schools look like today. So this data comes from 2017, and I broke it down into just white and non-white student populations. And in 2017, the number of white students was 24.4 million, and non-white was actually larger, 26.3 million. So white students are no longer the majority population throughout schools. However, there's a lot of disparity in different areas. So there are school districts where it's 95 and up percentage of white students, and there's a lot of still segregation that exists. So you don't maybe see it in your face all the time, but schools are becoming more diverse as the years go on. So this is a balance issue. So a lot of white teachers who have what we call white privilege, working with students who may not themselves obviously be white. So that can maybe create some issues. So just kind of real quick what white privilege is. White privilege is not racism. White privilege is more of an unseen thing, especially by white people like myself, who don't really understand that they have some perks and advantages in their lives that just seem normal. Right? It's not necessarily on purpose. It's not overt like discrimination that you might think of when you think of like the civil rights movement, but it does exist. So just real briefly, the history of this did start with racism or discrimination. The U.S. Constitution, where slavery existed, Manifest Destiny, where white Europeans decided it was their destiny from God to spread across the land and kick Native Americans off of their land. Jim Crow laws after the Civil War ending slavery, where there was still discrimination against African Americans, and of course segregation laws that even dealt with where people could live, especially black Americans. So there's a lot of real racial discrimination in our history that have led to the power dominance of white people in society that lead to this idea of white privilege. So there's a couple differences. So perks, these are things that don't necessarily disadvantage groups of people like in a way that's going to profoundly affect their lives, but they're things that are perks that are nice to have. So, and these are simple things that people might think really aren't that important, but I felt like I should mention them. Bandages, for example, they are white skin colored. So in fact, thinking today, I don't think I've ever seen a black colored Band-Aid. I'm sure they exist, but when you go to the store, probably going to find a normal one, right? It matches the skin tone of the white population. Hair products, you can go to a place in a store where it'll say hair products, and it's going to find mostly hair products for white people, but you might have to go to a place where it says ethnic hair products, right? So essentially it's just easier everyday experience or living as compared to not being white. So the real question is, for a white person, how would you feel if those were completely reversed? So like if you went to a hotel and the complimentary shampoo that was there was for African American hair, right? But you didn't have access to the products that you would use, right? So that's just a way to think about a perk. There are some real advantages, though, that have real profound impacts on people. So these are just things that white people don't really have to deal with. Harassment by law enforcement officials, job discrimination. It could be based even merely off your name on a resume, right? So being denied jobs just because of that. And a lot of this ends up leading to access to certain power positions and resources. The latest statistics that I saw were that 2 to 10 times more African Americans are denied home loans, for example, as compared to white Americans. So there's just things that really, there are major obstacles in non-white people's lives compared to white people that you don't understand if you don't experience it. If you've never gone to a store and been followed around by the security guards for no reason but your skin color, then you don't understand what it's like. And even more abstract is how white privilege and culture can shape people's worldviews. So a lot of this has to do with school. School is very much shaped around white European culture. History, for example, if you open up any standard history textbook, it's going to focus on white European history. And you might say, of course, well, that's just because that's history. But there's not a lot of focus on aspects of other cultures except for the negative aspects, right? So like slavery and Indian removal. Beyond that, you don't see much more. Civil rights movement, those kinds of things. And white culture norms are taught in school as well. So what can teachers do? Well, there's a couple things that can be done, especially for places that are predominantly white for the population. Incorporate diversity into the curriculum as best as possible. For example, read about a teacher who incorporated an elective called Urban History that was all about the plight of African Americans in American history and how we got to today. You can even look locally at things like local housing policies in history and the geography, dealing with, for example, redlining and racial discrimination in housing. Those are ways to open the eyes of students who aren't used to seeing some of these things.